And we've still got a bit under, just under, I think, 2 hours scheduled. Oh, there's two more people, so I think, right. We'll just wait until Rohan comes in. Sure. So we've actually got quite a few more slides to go through, and of course we're very, very happy to answer your questions, but there's also the matter of getting through the presentation. So what I'd suggest is if we sort of go through sort of a series of slides, and then we can answer questions. So rather than sort of just have, you know, as your questions arise, just if you could hold them until sort of I introduce a break, and we'll see whether that enables us to get through the material. It was just pointed out to me, Roger pointed out to me during the break, I've just got this slide, and the question was raised about whether we had calculated the revenue that had been recovered from the Upper North Island relative to other areas. Actually, we did do that, so I'd refer you to paragraph 6.51 in the paper, and that's all I'll say on that. But is there anything further you want to add, Roger? No? Oh.
Just briefly, as it transpires, the interconnection charge is skewed more towards the South Island compared to the replacement cost of the assets, and that's ignoring HVDC, which is also entirely charged to the South Island. So the charges in the North Island at the moment are relatively light if you were trying to get an even distribution of them.
Okay, so I'll just go back to where we were. Okay, so just before I move off the area of benefit charge, were there any questions around this calculation that you've thought about over lunch? Sure. Have we got a microphone? Probably, I could pass you one. If you could, just one thing, could I get, for people asking questions, would you be able to stand up? There's actually a camera just here, and that just, so it will just sort of help for people that are looking on the web, will be able to see who's talking. So thanks very much.
Alistair. Is this going?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, standing up at your seat's absolutely fine, but yep.
I was going to say, if I stand in the corner, am I out of shot of the camera?
Maybe, I don't know.
It's perhaps not so much a question relating directly to the example you've used, but do appreciate the example because it made a few things fall into place for me. But one of the things I guess that's been sort of irking us for a while with some of the transmission stuff is, and it touches briefly on Brian's point about making investments beyond just the incremental that's required. Often, kit comes in certain sizes, so for a start, you're always going to overinvest anyway. But also it kind of makes sense often to make that step change while you're there, if it's possible. But then that leaves that underutilised capacity, and what do we do with that? And
sure.
So when I look at this, I can't help but think that there's another beneficiary potentially in this piece. And or maybe the question more is, how do we account for that benefit that's created by the spare capacity that currently isn't being used?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things to bear in mind with this charge is, we think that the charge, it doesn't vary with use. So, the area benefit charge doesn't vary with use. So therefore, there's no, users have incentives to use it when it's been, when the investment's been made. I think the other point I'd say is that the assessment of benefit is over the lifetime of the investment. So we do think that does actually factor in with if there is a benefit from having a sort of a particular size investment to deal with those sort of long-term type effects. It probably, though, what the area benefit charge would do is improve the timing of those investments. Is that... You're looking puzzled.
No, that's
Roger,
fine, thanks.
Yep. Oh, yep. Yes.
To me, it simply comes down to how sophisticated Transpower is in its determination of benefits and how good its forecasting is, because you're presumably putting that extra capacity in because you expect to use it at some stage in the future, and then therefore the benefits are going to come at some stage in the future. If it's worth installing that capacity, you must be predicting some use for it and therefore some beneficiary of it.
Christine from Counties Power. Just comment on that. I mean, looking back to see what the capacity is and how the investment is going to be. Looking back, 10, 12 years when that huge investment was put in by Transpower for the Upper North Island, there was a lot of people submissions and there was a lot of work going on to say it wasn't necessary, including Hemingway coming over from Canada, and when he came up with the idea that it really wasn't necessary, he was sent back. So, I mean, who actually at the end of the day determines what is necessary as an investment and what we all have to pay for?
I mean, so we're not... That aspect of it doesn't actually change under our proposal. It's still the Commerce Commission that's determining whether an investment proceeds or not, which they would do through their processes. So what all this proposal was doing is changing who's charged for the investment. I mean, it will incentivise, we think, input into that process, but it doesn't actually affect who makes the decision. That's still the Commerce Commission and Transpower, as the party that would be proposing the investment. Okay, so what I'll do is move on to the next slide. So this is just describing in more detail the standard method and the simplified method for calculating the area of benefit charge. So the standard method would apply to large investments, so that's investments above 5 million and those historical investments above 50 million and Pole 2. The standard method would identify and charge all beneficiaries of investments to the extent practicable. So it's what we're seeking for the standard method is a granular methodology for identifying beneficiaries and charging all beneficiaries. Now, the simplified method would apply to the smaller investments, so those investments below $5 million. And the intention of the simplified method is that it is simple to apply and to administer. So it's a relatively low-cost method of identifying beneficiaries, and that would mean that there would be net benefits in applying a charge to those lower value investments, and would be simple for the party paying the charge to ascertain why they're subject to the charge. So the intention would be that the simplified method would identify the expected beneficiaries, except where that would compromise those two things, so simplicity for administration and application, and simplicity for parties to understand the charge. And in which case, if it wasn't practicable to do those things, then it would just apply to situations where the customer is expected to receive the majority of the benefits. So, as a result, our expectation is that the simplified method would at least identify and charge the main beneficiaries of an investment. Okay, so another aspect that we've gone into quite a bit of detail in this paper that we hadn't gone into as much detail in previous papers by and large, perhaps the exception would be the connection charge working paper, is with respect to the valuation methodology used for determining the charges. So we're not saying Transpower should change its valuation for determining its revenue, but this is all about the valuation method that's used for determining the charges. And our proposal is to use replacement cost to set the area of benefit charge for new investments, as well as for replacement, refurbishment and upgrades. And the reason for that is that charges would better reflect the services that are actually provided by the asset. So the effect of this is if you've got replacement cost, you would have over time, a relatively flat charge. However, if the replacement cost increases over time, then the charges would rise. We have indicated in the paper that this is a matter that we're still giving further thought to. So there is the option of using some other costing basis that may have similar sort of desirable characteristics. For example, indexed historical cost. But the important point is that the charges would be set to recover the capital cost of the asset plus the cost of capital over the expected life of the asset or the investment. And the charges would also include, as well as that capital cost and the cost of capital components, that also include an allocation for maintenance and operating costs. So for that reason, the charges would actually be somewhat similar to the connection charge, which covers all of those things. For the historical investments, we're proposing using depreciated historical costs. So that's the investments made prior to the second issues paper, and that is consistent with the way that investments are currently charged under the existing TPM, and it also avoids a problem of charging twice for any asset. So with depreciated historical costs, you get a very high charge early, immediately following the investment, and that falls over time with depreciation. So as a result, with those historical investments, there will have been significant cost recovery in some cases for those investments. So what we're trying to do is avoid double charging for those investments. We're also proposing optimisation would be available for the high value assets covered by the area of benefit charge. So that's the assets above $5 million. If the use has reduced significantly, and we've provided examples of sort of the level of use in the paper where optimisation may be appropriate, but it would be up to Transpower to determine when exactly that would be. So the optimisation, that would be for new assets. Optimisation would be available after the assets been in service for a number of years, and we've suggested 10 years. So for the first 10 years, we're not suggesting there would be optimisation, and the reason for that is we would expect that the asset early in its life would have been sized to the expectations about the likely demand for transmission in that early period. So really, what we're talking about is providing optimisation where there has been a change in demand from what was originally anticipated. The basis for optimisation would be optimised replacement costs for new investments and for existing assets. So that's those historical investments. If there were to be optimisation, the optimisation would be optimised depreciated historical cost. So that's quite a lot of detailed material. Are there any questions on that page?
Do you concede it's quite unusual to have differing asset valuation methodologies for assets, and that quite at opposite ends of the spectrum on your two that you've put up there? And secondly, but relatedly, given these are only guidelines, if Transpower itself found that it was just not workable to have two sets of valuation methodologies, is it free just to choose one of those and apply it consistently across all assets?
So I can answer that second question first, and then I'll try and answer the first question. I may let Roger also address it. So on the second question, the code requires that Transpower develops the TPM consistent with the guidelines. Along with, it has to be consistent with the statutory objective and Part 4 of the Commerce Act. So Transpower wouldn't be, if the guidelines specify a particular valuation method should be used, then Transpower would have to develop the TPM consistent with that. So, an answer to your question, no, they wouldn't be able to pick and choose. They'd have to follow. In terms of using two approaches, I guess what we're talking about is we're talking about what's the approach for providing an efficient signal going forward, and that's why we've chosen one approach for new investments. And then there's the question of, well, what's the appropriate approach for, since we're proposing to apply the charge to historical investments, what's the appropriate approach for that? And that's why we've chosen a different approach, because to avoid this double charging problem. So we think there are good reasons for the different approach. But the emphasis is going forward. We think replacement cost is probably the better way to go. Yes, is it Christine? That's right? Yep. Could you stand?
This may be just a layperson's question.
Sure.
But when you say that you're giving the cost for the investment and then the replacement refurbishment, but when you have a depreciation, you get a tax, like rebate, such as so. So from you're getting the tax reduction, so you're not paying, and so you're adding it back onto the lines people. Am I getting it right? That's like a double. You're getting a benefit here because you get a tax reduction, and then you're adding that depreciation or the cost of refurbishment and upgrade onto the lines company. It seems to me not quite right.
So I think what we're talking about here is just charging. So how we're allocating the charge.
But in your books, you'll be getting a reduction from the tax on depreciation.
Well, that's a sort of a separate issue in terms of the revenue that Transpower can recover. Can you elaborate on that? I don't know.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question, but to me, all we're talking about is the phasing of the charges. The charge is going to be the present value of the charges is going to be the same either way.
What I was saying is, you do a new investment, you get depreciation on that. Normally that depreciation goes to upgrading at a future day or investments to replace that. You're actually saying, right, I'm charging you for the new investment and I'm charging you for the upgrades, but you've got the benefit, say from Transpower, of getting that tax deduction on the depreciation.
I mean, that'll affect the revenue that Transpower can recover, and Transpower will still be using the depreciation. It will still be setting aside that depreciation for future investments. I think what you're talking about is affected by what revenue Transpower can recover overall, which is under the Commerce Act, Commerce Commission issue, rather than a charging issue, I think. But I'm not 100% sure. Do you have any? Oh, yeah. Rowan. So, sure. Is there something we? Rowan.
Tax calculation that the Commerce Commission comes up with, but I think what Alistair is saying, that's you've got to separate the revenue requirement, the amount of revenue that Transpower needs to recover in totality, versus the charging mechanism and the basis for charging. So they're two different things.
Yeah.
I don't quite see it that way. When you get a depreciation on an asset.
Could you just hold on, Chris? We'll just bring you a microphone.
Okay, I was just saying, when you get a depreciation, on an asset, that money is also used. Well, you can use it any way you like in the business, but usually as a replacement for ageing assets or development. And it seems to me that if you're getting that's taking off the cost of your investment, and you're actually charging the lines company for replacing and upgrades, you're actually getting a double whammy.
I think overall, our proposal, the amount of revenue that's recovered over the lifetime of the investment, whether it's depreciated historical cost or replacement cost, would still be the same. So I don't think there is a double whammy in terms of charging. It's still the same level of revenue that's being recovered in relation to the investment. So and then So I'm not sure that there is an issue here. But I mean, we can certainly take that offline if that would help. Yep. Okay, any other... Oh, so Hayden. Would you be able to stand up, Hayden, please, just so the camera can see who you are? And
is this on? I'm sure, as you're aware, one of the consequences of using a DHC for the existing assets, I think there's about 20 of them that fall into that bucket, is the value will be zero once they're fully depreciated. So the prices will be zero. And the day after, the customers are going to get a big price increase, which is not particularly efficient, it seems to me. So I guess the question is whether you thought about that. And the avoiding charging twice for any asset, I mean, I guess in theory I understand what you're saying, but Transpower is not going to recover more than its revenue requirements. So given the obvious inefficiency associated with having future price spikes, doesn't... where do you see the sort of the lesser of two evils is, I suppose?
I guess so. On the first point, so the depreciated historical cost would just apply to recovery of those investments, those historical investments. So, and then they would, for the replacement of those investments, the charging would be consistent with all new investments, which would be replacement cost. So, to the extent there's a price spike, it would be the same across all, right across the grid. So not just, be consistent across all areas. As to, sorry, I think I didn't quite get your second question. Did you get it, Roger? Or?
Oh no, I understand what you're saying with the sort of over recovery on an individual asset given the profiles, but it's not as though Transpower is going to be making too much money overall. It'll just result in a smaller residual, which
it's exactly right. And our thinking was that if we proposed the replacement cost for historical assets, this is one of our thoughts anyway, that if then the customers who were going to get the increase in charges as a consequence of that would be the ones who would be exactly accusing us of charging twice. The exact basis on which we recover historical assets doesn't particularly matter because they're there.
Okay, on to the next one. I'll try and speed up a wee bit so that we can get through as much of this as we possibly can. So another aspect which I mentioned earlier into the area of benefit charge is that we're proposing is a marginal cost adjustment. So this is to ensure that the price signal that's provided is efficient. So what this would involve is that Transpower, when it's proposing an investment, would identify the customers that benefit from that investment and allocate the cost in proportion to the relative benefits. So as we've described earlier, and then what we are saying is how the marginal cost adjustment could work is that pre-investment, each customer could potentially reduce its charges by credibly committing to reducing demand, for example, by installing and operating DG. So this is a situation where there would be an efficiency benefits from DG because DG would lower the size of the investment that would be required. And then under this marginal cost adjustment, the customer charges would reduce by the marginal savings that Transpower makes. So to illustrate this, we've got this hypothetical example. So suppose, for example, Transpower proposes to install a new transformer costing $10 million. Then it assesses that customer A would receive 40% of the benefit, and its charges would be $4 million in present value terms. Customer A then says, well, I install DG, and that reduces my benefit to 20%. Transpower would then be able to install a smaller transformer costing, say, $9 million. In that case, customer A's charges would be reduced by the saving that Transpower makes. So $1 million, so their charges would be reduced to $3 million. In other words, their original assessed charge less the saving to Transpower. Any questions on that one? Okay, so now on to the residual charge. So as we discussed earlier, we're proposing to apply this just to load, and the residual charge is designed to recover all revenue that's not recovered by other TPM charges. So connection, area of benefit, if there is a long-run marginal cost charge, long-run marginal cost charge, and if there is a KVAR charge, the KVAR charge. It's not intended to provide a signal, so this is a point I cannot emphasise enough. It's just intended to recover Transpower's remaining revenue requirement in the least distortionary way possible. So we have designed it so that it's difficult to avoid. And it would recover the costs also of any optimisation and any prudent discounts. So we're proposing that the residual charge would be calculated according to physical capacity, and we have three possible approaches of calculating that physical capacity. So transformer capacity, line capacity, and gross anytime maximum demand. And the basis for determining each of those is slightly different, at least between the first two and the third. So transformer capacity and line capacity would be the relevant capacity in the 12 months prior to the date of the release of the issues paper. So, and the reason for that is so you can't make changes in response to this proposal. And for gross anytime maximum demand, so that's gross anytime maximum demand is the customer's AMD plus DG plus demand side response in the 5 years prior to 17 May 2016. And we're proposing 5 years to deal with any anomalies in demand that might have occurred during that period, so that a customer isn't punished for, say, having a particularly high AMD in a particular year. So Transpower, so that's the proposal for the application of the residual charge. For a new entrant, we're proposing that Transpower would develop a proxy for physical capacity for new entrants, but it's unrelated to physical capacity. So what the intention there, and this is the case with any charge with respect to new entrants, is that a new entrant would be subject to the same charge as its equivalent incumbent, so that we're not wanting to the transmission charges to be introducing any distortions to competition. So that's why we're doing that, and that's the case with the residual charge here. It would also be the case with the area of benefit charge. So if you get a new entrant with the area of benefit charge, their charges would be set to be equivalent to any equivalent incumbent. And now the question was made earlier was, were we proposing to update that physical capacity measure? Yes, we are suggesting that it would be updated after a lag, and the period of the lag would be proposed by Transpower. The paper discusses 10 years. So we're suggesting that lag should be quite a long period of time, so that there is limited incentive to change behaviour to avoid the charge. Any questions on that slide? Yes, down the front here. Oh, good. Sorry. We'll just wait for the microphone. And
just a wee bit confused about the term capacity, because you mentioned that you've set it so that people can't adjust it. But to me, capacity is actually determined by the rating of the device, such as the transformer. So I was a bit confused by what you actually mean as capacity. So we're talking, so the rating of the device would be one way to apply the charge. So Transpower, Transpower would identify the sort of the detailed approach for how to apply it. But that it's really what we're talking about is, for example, if you think about the transformer capacity, it's the rating in that period. In that 12-month period prior to 2017. So it's whatever existed
during that period. So if there had been some change in capacity in transformers, it would probably be something like the average during that period. Does that make... No? The average rating? No? Doesn't...
Because to me, the capacity of the transformer, if I've got a 100 kVA transformer,
Yep.
MVA transformer, that's 100 MVA.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It doesn't change unless you replace the transformer.
That's right. Exactly right. So we're saying that your charge would be based on your 100 MVA transformer.
Right.
Yeah. But if you started with a 50 MVA transformer and say, if you had a 50 MVA transformer, during that 12-month period you switch to 100, then it would be an average of the two. So it would be 75 MVA.
Wouldn't that then be covered by the area of benefit because you've changed the asset?
No, the area of benefit relates to Transpower's investments, not the customer's investments.
Right, so you're saying for a lines company it would be the aggregated number of transformers that I've got connected to that GXP and their ratings.
That's right. Or something like that. It may not be all of the transformers because there might be spares. It would depend on what measure Transpower chose to use for determining transformer capacity.
Even if my utilisation is 30%.
Yeah, well, if Transpower might say, okay, let's do average utilisation across all line companies. That might be what it might do. So it's whatever it chose to do, and that would be the measure.
Is your issue with how to calculate it, the difficulty in calculating?
I was just confused about as far as now that you said that it's the aggregated total.
Yep.
I understand what you mean. I was just getting confused because I was taking it as Transpower's asset, not the lines company's asset. Yep. So when you talked about the fact that it was to stop any changes, I got confused about, well, surely that would be covered by Transpower's plans anyway.
Yeah. So I mean, we're not saying that you can't change your transformer capacity. It's just that the basis for determining the charge would be your transformer capacity as at that time. So if say next year you changed your transformer capacity from 100 MVA to 200 MVA, that won't affect your charge. It would still be on the basis of 100 MVA until such time as there was an update through the one on the bottom line.
But I'm guessing that the reverse behaviour that could drive as a reduction in the level of security, because under that it'd be better to go to insecurity rather than have N-1 where it effectively doubled.
It won't. No. It shouldn't affect your security unless you're making your investment decisions on the basis of what's going to happen, say, in 10 years' time. So it shouldn't affect your investment decisions, because of this. We're not proposing that this charge would be adjusted until a long period of time has passed. So it shouldn't, unless you're making the investment decisions on very, very long term. On the basis of transmission charges in 10 years' time, it shouldn't affect that.
Just to be clear, that's not a fault. That's a feature that's precisely designed to be like that. And the 10 years or whatever the period is will make it essentially irrelevant in any commercial discount rate. What happens in 10 years' time, and therefore you'll make your decision on whether you upgrade your transformer. Not on the basis, that won't be affected by this charge because the charge will stay the same.
This essentially makes it like a fixed charge.
Yep.
So it won't affect your future consumption and investment decisions. I mean, that's the point about linking it to a historical measure of physical capacity. It won't influence those future investment decisions because you can't influence that effectively fixed charge.
Okay, good. I was just wanting to check the time, so just to make sure
more.
Brian.
Sorry about this. In the previous one, you said that if somebody put in distributed generation, they would reduce their charges. But if they put in, say, solar power that didn't make any difference to peak demand, they would be getting the benefit of a reduced megawatt hour, but not conferring any benefit on Transpower. It doesn't make sense. I mean, you come back to the thing that it's megawatts, it costs money.
So what we're talking about, so this marginal cost adjustment it's an investment that would defer the need for a future investment, or reduce the size of that future investment that's required. So that's what we're talking about under this marginal cost adjustment. So, well, no, but as I said, the area of benefit charge is charged on the basis of the share of benefit. So it is your share of benefit. So you take the revenue recovery, the revenue that needs to be recovered each year, and what your share is just that percentage, as I explained in that slide. It's just your percentage benefit that is the charge. It's not megawatt hours, it's not megawatts, it's just share of benefit. So unless there are several parties at the node, and then there could potentially be on a megawatt hour or megawatts, depending on whether you're load or generation, or vice versa. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I'll let Christine determine.
Yeah, Alice.
Would you be able to just stand up, please? Sorry.
Yeah, I have a question about the prudent discount policy slide that Brian
the prudent discount. I'll be coming on to the prudent discount soon.
The slide that Brian was the example.
Marginal cost adjustment. Yep.
This one here. So, if customer A installs distributed generation and reduces its benefit to 20%, it has to commit to do that and actually do it.
Yep.
So therefore, it would have 20%, and under the original plan, would have 2 million charges, right? But now customer A's charge is reduced to 3 million, and it seems to go up. I don't understand.
It goes from 4 million down to 3 million.
Well, it was 4 million when it had 40% of the benefit. After DG, it's only got 20% of the benefit. So, other things equal, shouldn't its charges go down to 2 million?
Because of the scale efficiencies in the
Rohan, do you want?
No.
Because of the scale efficiencies in the transformer that's installed here, reducing the overall load on it by 20%, say, doesn't necessarily reduce the cost by 20%. Might only reduce the cost by 10%. So that's why you're getting maybe what you're referring to is a disconnect, but that's why that happens.
Okay, well, maybe take it offline.
Yeah. Otherwise, what happens is it's effectively an average cost. You're taking a cost and divvying it up by the beneficiaries, but that may not necessarily represent the marginal cost associated with a small increment or small change in the sizing of the transformer. And that's the price signal that you want to send to end customers. So that's what this is really trying to do here.
So even if it installed distributed generation which reduced its benefit, it would still pay 4 million?
If it reduced its benefit, yes, it would reduce it down to, say, in this scenario, 3 million.
But if Transpower didn't do anything, they would observe that as being only 20% of the benefit rather than 40%. So it would be a 2 million charge, wouldn't it? I don't understand. I'm sorry.
Do you want to have a go, Roger?
The difference is if we reduced it by the average cost, then the situation can arise where it pays the customer to reduce their demand on Transpower, even though that's inefficient. And so the point is that if you reduce their charges by Transpower's savings, then that means that they will only commit to reducing their charges, commit to reducing the demand on Transpower if it is efficient to do so. So if you go to the chapter in the book which discusses this, which I think is chapter 7, there is an explanation of just that point.
So is the intent to forestall the installation of distributed generation by offering a lower price?
No.
Okay.
It's to send a correct price signal around the value of that distributed generation in the context of what it does to the cost of the alternative, being the transformer. So in this scenario here, if we go from 40% to 20%, the price signal, just stop it there, the price signal would be $2 million. So I've got up to $2 million to invest in a distributed generation unit. However, if I spent $2 million, the actual benefit would only be $1 million to Transpower, because the cost only comes down by $1 million. So that's why you need the efficient marginal price signal, not just like an average cost of that particular piece of kit.
Okay.
Does that help?
That's good. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, sure.
Alistair, can we just jump forward one slide to the
Sure.
slide that you were last on? Yep. Just picking up on a point that you made that you just used an example where Transpower may choose to use utilisation as a basis.
Yeah.
Yep.
So gross anytime maximum demand, is that what you...
Well, I guess that's
Yeah.
where my question is going.
Yeah.
Is how much scope does Transpower have to determine the method that they used?
Under our proposal, Transpower could choose between those three methods, so line capacity, transformer capacity, or gross anytime maximum demand.
Okay, are you seeking alternatives from submitters on the methods that you would like to put in the guidelines?
I mean, we would certainly welcome feedback on whether you think these methods have value, or whether we should, whether there's others that you think would be better. But if you're going to suggest one, we would need to know why, and why they'd be superior to these ones.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yep. But I mean, the key point is, what we'd be, if we were going to have a different one, they would need to be done in a way that still has these characteristics that we're looking for, so that you can't alter your behaviour to avoid the charges. Yep. Yeah.
Just interrupt here, just to get this right. The issue here is that Transpower have to propose to the authority which of those three methods and how it's going to do it, and it has to prove to the authority that it chose the best method.
Carl, can you just grab the microphone just so we can...
Just to make, because it's a very good question, but I don't want people to go away from here thinking that Transpower just gets to choose between those three. What happens is Transpower has to propose to the authority which of those three methods, and it has to prove to the authority that they've chosen the best method, and the authority will consult on that, and after consultation it will either approve or reject, and there will be another round. So it isn't within Transpower's discretion to choose between the three. It's Transpower's discretion to recommend. The authority's role is to approve.
Yeah, so that's just, so the overall TPM the authority is approving, and so that includes all the details within that. Yep.
Alan Holden, I have a question around the gross AMD, and sort of following on from my original question around embedded generation. Now I'm a little bit confused when I see the equation there.
Yep.
And it looks a little bit like the new extended reserves equation in terms of customer AMD plus generation plus demand side response, which I assume is interruptible load or some other ancillary service.
Yeah.
Could you explain the equation, please?
Yeah. So as I said, the reason we're proposing that it's not just AMD but gross AMD is we're trying to come up with a measure that takes into account any activity that could be undertaken to try to reduce the charge. So what we're trying, and then the reason for that is we're trying to come up with a method so that the customers don't have an incentive or ability to try to engage in behaviour to reduce their charge, except of course they can supply themselves for a lower cost overall. If they were able to supply themselves for a lower cost overall, that's fine. They could avoid the charge entirely and disconnect from the grid. But in the situation that they're continuing to use Transpower's grid, continuing to be a customer, then the idea is that it's anytime maximum demand plus the distributed generation plus the demand side response. And that's to ensure that all factors are taken into account, in terms of a customer's connection to the grid.
So this is the opposite answer to what I received earlier, and now I'm really confused. So
no, I don't think it is. I think it's exactly what I said before. Sorry, just hold a moment, Alan. Would you be able to have the microphone? Sorry about that.
So just to use some real numbers. So say I have a gross load of 100 megawatts, and I've got some embedded distributed generation of 50.
Yeah.
My net load's 50. So do I take the AMD of 100 plus my 50?
It's 100 plus. If it's embedded, it's 150.
100 minus 50.
No, 100 plus 50. So it's gross. That's correct, isn't it?
No, I think in your example it'd be the 100, because you said it was 100
gross.
At 50 DG.
Correct.
Come up with a net 50.
Correct.
So in this case, it wouldn't be the 50, it'd be the 100.
Yeah, that's what the answer was earlier, but I'm still confused about what's on the slide then, I guess. So, you're calculating it. I got you. Okay, and demand side response, was I correct that that's IL?
Yes, that would be IL. Yep, include IL.
Yay.
So it's the same as what I said before. So what we're trying to do is come up with a way, by adding in demand response, it means that in future you would not have incentive to use your demand response to lower your charge. Because if you did, it doesn't have any effect.
In particular, a charge that is recovering historical investments. That's the important issue.
So we're trying to do it in trying to come up with a way of designing a charge that means there's no incentive to change your behaviour to avoid the charge. It's trying to be very, very tax-like, lump sum tax-like.
Yeah, I guess you'll appreciate that Norske pretty upset about that. Given that we've spent a lot of time and effort over the last 8 years to become very good at avoiding that charge.
Yeah, but we appreciate that, but the point here is we still need to recover Transpower's costs, and where this residual charge causes a problem, such as a customer may decide to exit the grid in some way, and then there's the prudent discount policy would apply.
So do you understand that? I understand it's a tax, and I understand you have to collect that tax, but do you understand that the impact may be that large users such as Norske and people that are driven by commodity-based products in a difficult market may in fact disconnect from the grid?
Okay, I think at this point I need to talk about the prudent discount policy. Oh, sorry, I think it's got one more question, and then I'll go on to the prudent discount policy.
Sorry, just a really quick one, but there's locking in this 10-year, effectively making it a fixed cost at a time when new technologies and stuff are coming down. You're hitching it to EDB's assets. So doesn't that remove some incentives for EDBs to run their networks more efficiently, and for consumers to, and government proposals to use energy more efficiently and stuff? All of this says it makes no difference. So if I could run my network with 30 transformers as opposed to 40 transformers, I don't see the benefit until 10 years. Is that right?
So, as I said before, so in fact, if you look at the third point, the intention of this is to not provide a signal. It's just to recover revenue. So the signal is provided through the area of benefit charge, and we still have to find a way to recover Transpower's revenue, and Transpower gets to fully recover its revenue. So what EDBs, if they engage in those investments, what they do is avoid future area of benefit charges. So we're still not removing that incentive. It's just using a different approach to providing that incentive.
No, I'm sorry, I would have to disagree with that, because that area of
just hold a moment, Alan.
I'm all for efficiency incentives, but the area benefit charge, I think from Norske perspective, was thousands of dollars, but the residual was millions of dollars. So saving $1,000 ain't going to incentivise us to do anything.
So there's a couple of points there. So firstly, as I said, those model charges are just the initial model charges. As new area benefits investments are added, and you're getting more recovery through the area benefit charge, the residual charge would go down.
But the company's already gone broke after the first year with that.
Okay, I think we should move on to the prudent discount policy. Right, so the prudent discount policy. So the prudent discount policy, so as I said, there's a prudent discount policy under the status quo. So at the moment, customers can receive a prudent discount if they can undertake an investment to bypass the grid, and the value of that prudent discount relates to the cost of the investment to bypass the grid. So that's their new transmission charge. So we are proposing to extend the prudent discount. And so there are several ways which we're proposing it would be extended. Firstly, if it's privately beneficial to build generation to disconnect
from to a disconnect from the grid. So in other words, you can self-supply through investing in generation, and therefore that would enable you to disconnect from the grid. Then you would be eligible for a prudent discount. The second example is if there is a material risk of a party closing down its New Zealand plant, and so it would disconnect from the grid. So in that situation, effectively what would be happening is that the residual charge would be providing too strong a signal for disconnecting. So a prudent discount would be appropriate in that circumstance. The third example, or third situation, is if transmission charges exceed standalone costs. So if transmission charges exceed a party's standalone costs, they would be subsidising other customers. So therefore, a prudent discount would apply to them. In other words, their charges, as we said earlier, should not exceed their standalone costs. And then the fourth situation is a prudent discount could apply to a distributor where they had an embedded customer in a similar circumstance to B or C. So why are we proposing these extensions for prudent discounts, and in particular to deal the issue with closure risk? So it would be available to customers for whom transmission charges are a material cost, so it's not just to all customers, it is to a limited number, and it would be linked to the key factors affecting that closure decision. So, for example, we're suggesting the prudent discount would apply to the world price of a customer's output. And so we're aware that there are commercial contracts where the contract of a customer is linked to their world price. So as the prudent discount may apply, the rate may be, the size of the discount may be large when the world price is low, but reduce if the world price is high. The prudent discount would be able to be reduced or suspended if the key factors relied on in granting the prudent discount changed. So the customer was materially at risk, but then some factors changed and that was no longer the case, then the prudent discount could be reduced or suspended. Now, one of the questions that the paper asks is who should make the decision about prudent discount applications under B, C and D. So I said in the paper it could be either Transpower or the authority. Now, what we've heard in the various discussions we've had is most parties seem to be preferring the authority would make that decision as an independent party, but we certainly would welcome your views on that point. Okay, I think, did I have another slide? Oh, yes. So just one further point on the prudent discount. So why does it make sense to have a prudent discount? It's probably relatively difficult to see this figure from where you are, particularly the key. So the key is the situation, the distribution of charges to distributors under our proposal. That's the orange bar. The light blue bar is the proposal with a $30 million prudent discount. And then and that may be to one or more customers. And then the black bar is the proposal if those parties receiving the prudent discount exit. So in other words, the prudent discount would, by providing a prudent discount, you're avoiding the remaining customers receiving a higher charge than if the customer stayed and continued to contribute to common costs. Okay, so were there any questions about Sure. Okay, Alan.
This is where you get the bollocking. No.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Okay, so when I first read that document and saw this prudent discount thing, I could see that definitely applied to Norske Skog, and I can guarantee you that with the current pricing methodology, we would be out of business within 18 months. We are like many large users in the country. We're owned by foreigners who have multiple plants around the world, and they will close in a surplus supply and demand situation. They'll close the least performing unit. And we're all on a knife edge, and I don't think I'm the only one. Norske definitely is one of many paper machines around the world. There is a surplus of production, and we will be closed if we get this line charge increase. Obviously, we've been very effective at reducing our current interconnection charges, and we haven't done that to make more money. We've done that to survive. It's just a matter of survival. So we would definitely apply for this prudent discount policy. However, the cat's sort of already out of the bag, and this is a concern I have. One concern is the paper that was published very easily discerns the cost that Norske will likely incur, and that's now in the public arena. So our investors, and I can see there's $8 million there. It's in the book. It's in the paper, and it doesn't take much to see that would have an impact on our business now. So here we are in a situation of stress, trying to negotiate through some policy with a bunch of guys from Transpower or the AA for our survival. So that's the second point. First point is, before publishing any more data that's sensitive to our business, I think you should come and talk to us first. The second point is, I don't think the EA or Transpower have the economic sense, if you like, that the Commerce Commission would have in terms of making decisions of this nature. I think the Commerce Commission should be making the decisions. And one question I have, I guess a straight question, is have you done an economic model considering the economic impact to the country in terms of employment if our company was to close, the wider Bay of Plenty economic impact, and then have you considered the economic impact to the network and the grid security if you don't have something like Norske with its IL generation and so forth. So anyway, we are not happy.
So I can answer the first question. The modelling is just indicative. It's very clearly indicated in the modelling chapter and indeed in the paper that it's indicative only. It was to give people an idea of the charges they may face under this particular proposal. And we are, when David speaks shortly, he'll tell you about the fact that it's been used for 2014 flows and brought forward 2019. It won't necessarily be the charges that will actually apply, A, because it's only indicative, and B, because, as Alistair's indicated today, Transpower have to consider some things and make proposals on those things to the authority to approve. So there's some degree of discretion which Transpower can do, which will affect the charges. So the cat definitely isn't out of the bag with respect to those charges, because they're not the real charges that are likely to apply. They're just indicative modelling charges. And in terms of the CBA, but we have done a CBA. We haven't looked at it at a regional level. We've looked at it at a national economic efficiency level. Is there anything you want to comment on that, Rowan, in terms that it does come out very strongly positive?
This was one component of the proposal.
Rowan, do you want to just take that?
This was one component of the proposal that we modelled in the CBA. So that has been included, and there are net benefits associated with including this PDP proposal, this change in the PDP proposal relative to the status quo. And it looks at all of those things that you're talking about. The probability of a current business going out of business because of transmission prices that are above the avoidable cost of providing transmission services effectively. I'm not going to divulge exactly which businesses we looked at, but we did look at yes, we've got a couple of major ones.
And have you spoken to those major ones one-on-one just to talk it through?
No. So I think as I understand it, we haven't. I mean, we have tried to contact Norske and for a meeting, but I'm not sure, as far as I understand, we haven't actually met with you. But we'd certainly be very happy to meet with you to discuss the proposal. So just on your point about the Commerce Commission approving the prudent discount, I don't think the authority has the ability to grant a role to the Commerce Commission. I think that would probably require legislation. But I mean, we'd certainly welcome any thoughts you had. That's my understanding, but we can certainly.
In terms of frame of reference, your frame of reference is not the frame of reference on mobility. The Commerce Commission has a much wider frame of reference.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Okay. So.
And you don't give them anything. You don't ask them would they do it.
Right. Yep.
Okay, so as I said, we can only do what we can within our legislation. So that but that certainly, if you have thoughts on that, certainly provide them in your submission. But as I said, I think we're limited in what we can do in terms of who we can determine as the decision maker on this sort of thing.
I don't think the Commerce Commission does have that responsibility. The Trade Practices Act. What's it called here? The Commerce Act. It's Fair Trading Act. It's Part 4A. It's mergers and acquisitions. It's monopoly pricing. I don't think it's got jurisdiction with respect to the matter that you just discussed. I'm almost certain it doesn't, but I'm not an absolute expert on the Commerce Act. And you have to ask yourself, in any event, is it the most appropriate party? The authority thinks it's the most appropriate or potentially transparent. That's why we're asking a question on it.
Just a quick question on the prudent discount policy. How does it work where if you give a prudent discount to a company and that results in what otherwise would have been sort of freed up transmission assets, and so the distributor, the lines company, actually has to pay a higher area of benefit charges, or has to pay them sooner than they would have otherwise had to pay them? So how do you do that balancing act?
So the suggestion is that the focus of the prudent discount policy is on the residual charge, because the area of benefit charge, if a party is receiving net benefits from the investment, that would mean that their charges are likely to fall between incremental cost and standalone cost, so they should be efficient. So it's really around the residual charge and the extent to which the residual charge is altering their behaviour. So we're not envisaging that there would be a change to the area of benefit charge through the prudent discount policy, but there might be a change if, say, the customer reduced its load, and therefore optimisation would be appropriate. So optimisation is really the mechanism for dealing with those sorts of situations with respect to the area of benefit charge.
Yeah, I would have thought if you're close to having to pay for a new investment area of benefit charge, and the authorities artificially kept some company going that would have otherwise not been in the market, then you've basically incurred a cost on those other companies by bringing the. In other words, if that company closed down, the area of benefit charge would have been further off in the further years off before the demand picked up.
For future area of benefit charge, but if the company left, then the remaining customers who are paying that area of benefit charge would effectively face a higher charge potentially. Although I imagine that would be optimisation would be quite appropriate in that instance.
That's right. That's overall, but obviously in certain areas that may not hold because but there's a lot high growth. There's actually customers coming in to fill that void in the capacity, I suppose, is basically what's happening.
Yeah, well, it would depend on the circumstances to whether optimisation was appropriate. But the focus of the prudent discount is on the residual. And so, the point here is that if the company stays but with a prudent discount, the costs of those prudent discounts are spread across all customers, and their charges are lower than if the company exits.
Yeah, I suppose you really need to run your pricing models again, because some of these very large customers were to go, that free up generation capacity, and actually our customers, some of those big South Island loads, if they were to go, you'd see wholesale energy prices drop down. And so, in fact, there might be a counter benefit to our consumers.
Yes, but we'd expect there still would be an adjustment to those charges as well. To wholesale prices. Over time as well. The generators are obviously going to respond if their prices are lower too.
But it's all they're marginally priced. So obviously, if there's a availability of generation, we've seen that lately. That whole generation prices have kept down and partly from some of these. I believe some of these larger players dropping out of the market or reducing demand. It's obviously benefited all consumers in New Zealand. And that just needs to be taken into account with you're basically artificially keeping some companies going when there's other benefits that could be considered.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do here is come up. The alternative would have been something like what's economists call Ramsey pricing.
But what we're trying to do is, Ramsey pricing, as we've said in the paper, is difficult to apply, so that's why we're proposing a more administrative approach. It's certainly an efficient pricing method, and it is appropriate where a customer is more sensitive to charges than other customers, that they face a lower charge, at least from an efficiency point of view.
Yeah, I suppose we just see it as a bit of an issue with the original way you're recovering the residual charge within AMD, which is obviously creating all sorts of issues for some of the large generator. And then on the flip side, you're trying to then fix it with another policy at the same time. Just seems like a bad logic and policy there. There's various measures of capacity that were proposed, and AMD is just one of them. Okay, I think we should probably move on to the next slide. So, and this is around the mechanisms to discount charges. So we have talked about the PDP. And optimisation, so specific assets subject to the standard area of benefit charge can be optimised. So the optimisation wouldn't apply to those assets subject to the simplified area of benefit method. It would, and that would avoid customers paying substantially higher prices as a result of actions of a single large customer or local economic conditions. So optimisation, we think, is an appropriate adjustment. And then I also mentioned that the area of benefit charge could also be revised if there was a material change in circumstance. I think we've covered all of those points. Okay, so I'll now move on to the additional components. We're proposing several additional components. So these are matters that Transpower would consider when it's considering the guidelines, and consider whether to implement these components if that would promote the statutory objective. But if Transpower decides against proposing these additional components, then it would be desirable for Transpower to keep those matters under review. And so we're proposing additional components in relation to the long-run marginal cost charge, a KVAR charge, and then the next three of those additional components relate to connection assets. So stage commissioning, charging for assets when other investments join those assets in a loop, and allocation of operating and maintenance costs. And the last of those components also applies to the area of benefit charge. So those additional components, they may or may not be implemented immediately, or would following the guide, a publication of any guidelines the authority decides, and so it would be up to Transpower to consider and identify whether they promoted the statutory objective. We're also proposing some co-changes outside the TPM guidelines. So the TPM, once Transpower proposes a TPM, and if the authority decides to add it to the code, the TPM becomes part of the code. So in addition to that, we're proposing some further code changes. So one relates to the allocation of loss and constraint excess, and then the other relates to minimum power factors. So the first of these, and I'm sorry that... sorry.
Alistair, I'm just conscious of the time. It's about 2:20. We've only got 40 minutes left. Rather than probably go through all the additional components, I think it might be better use of people's time to discuss the modelling and the CBA, because I think we're going to run out of time. I think there is quite a lot of interest in the CBA and indeed in some of the modelling, some of the questions, and of course the CBA is central to any regulatory proposal. So how about, is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
How about we go through...
Well, I mean, what do people think about that?
Could we go briefly on the long-run marginal cost? But the other things I agree with, like go back to KVAR.
Yeah, that's right. Cool. Yeah, okay.
Sure. Okay. All right.
I wasn't speaking to everyone.
Is it everybody happy with that? So we'll just go through long-run marginal cost, and then we'll go on to the modelling.
Modelling, yep. And then we'll go on to the CBA.
Okay. All right. Okay, so one thing I would say is we will put this entire presentation up on the internet, so you can look at the slides and they should be reasonably self-explanatory. Okay, so the long-run marginal cost charge. So nodal prices normally account, as we discussed earlier, for the short-run marginal cost of using the grid. So they signal the cost of losses and constraints on the transmission network. And as the grid becomes congested, average nodal prices downstream rise and upstream they fall. So eventually those prices rise enough to justify investing in the grid because of the savings that would occur in avoiding additional costs of losses and constraints. But if an investment's triggered earlier by something else, it may be efficient to ration the grid use to defer the investment. And so we're proposing that Transpower could introduce a long-run marginal cost charge to efficiently defer investment where nodal prices are insufficient to signal the future costs of that investment. And we're proposing that it would be up to Transpower to propose the detailed design of that long-run marginal cost charge. But we expect that if it was introduced, it would be applied where there's a risk that an investment might be inefficiently undertaken. So, in other words, the investment might occur because parties are not taking into account, adequately taking into account the future potential costs from that investment. We would expect that it would probably apply to peak congestion, or possibly could also potentially perhaps apply to peak demand, assuming that's what's triggering the inefficient new investment. It would be set to increase with increasing demand in order that the investment would be further deferred. And when the investment's made, and assuming it's efficient, then the LRMC charge would be removed. So, however, what we also are saying is that for the LRMC charge, it would need to be better than just providing better signalling through nodal prices. So potentially changes could be made to nodal prices to better signal the costs of using the grid with respect to future transmission investment. So any questions on the LRMC charge? Okay, I've got one from Brian. Christina?
All this worries me a lot. If you go back 40 years, we had charges of $25 a kilowatt and 0.27 cents per kilowatt hour, because intelligent engineers worked out that the biggest cost to them and the system was building new capacity, transmission, generation and distribution. That's what got us ripple control, and that's what held our load constant. Now, you seem to be concentrating on sticking plaster solutions to odd bits of transmission system while ignoring the bigger picture of what it costs to produce more generating capacity, in the long run more transmission capacity and more distribution capacity. So you've evaporated what was previously a fairly inadequate signal on the actual cost, long run, of increasing demand to one that is derisory. You need to consider the benefit of the consumers and provide costs to them that reflect the system cost of what they're doing. Increasing the capacity of the system by 1 megawatt costs 3,000 or 4,000, 2,000 or 3,000 for generation, and 1,000 at least for transmission and distribution. So that says the kilowatt charge should be somewhere in the $200 or $300 region. And you're, by the looks of it, proposing to have it a tenth of that, and you expect to get a system which is all efficient and runs the benefit of the consumers. You're forgetting what really matters. Stand back and look at the whole system. then you've got the problem of dry year reserve, which nobody discusses at once.
So, Brian, just can I interrupt you there? So we are running out of time. So just
okay,
so if you come to your question, and then
what I'm saying is what you're doing here is fiddling around the edges of a problem that you're refusing to recognise.
Okay. I think what I very, very briefly say is this LRMC charge does relate to future transmission investment costs. And the RCPT charge relates to costs that have been incurred in the past, so it's not related to the future costs. So this charge is a more appropriate charge. And I think I'll leave it there, and I think we should probably, if I go to the modelling, would it be better to do the modelling, or we could go through the modelling and...
I think it makes sense to the modelling.
Okay.
It comes quite closely after the proposal.
Okay, so we'll try and go through the modelling quickly. David, if you want.
Thanks, Alistair. So, good afternoon, everyone. We'll just do a quick summary of the modelling here on 2 slides, and we can take a few questions. And I think Alistair's going to go into the results after that. So, I can't emphasise enough, the modelling is indicative only. The purpose of the modelling is to help you understand how the method can be applied, but we need to remember that there is discretion for Transpower to apply different methods. So the guidelines aren't overly prescriptive. So we've just modelled one way the guidelines can be applied, and within that there are simplifications that we've applied to undertake the modelling. So we've used market data from 2014 to approximate a 2019 scenario. And the status quo modelling has the TPM amendments in it that apply from 2017. So if you're looking at status quo charges in the modelling, they won't be directly applicable to your current status quo transmission charges. Those amendments will have an impact. In the 2019 scenario, the 2 Huntly Rankine units are in, and Southdown and Otahuhu B are out in terms of the generation. Demand has increased by roughly 1% per year, so that's almost a 5% increase. And there's some other minor changes in how we've addressed the make-up generation. So that assumes some open cycle gas turbines are required to make up the generation. Obviously, when you take an investment out, transmission investment out, there's a shortfall of supply in some areas, at least a risk of that in peak times. So we've used 2 different methods to model the transmission charges. For the 6 largest investments, we've used VSPD or VSPUD, and we've modelled that on a half-hourly basis over a year. We run 2 scenarios. We have one with the transmission investment in, one with the transmission investment out, and by comparing those scenarios we can determine the private benefits expected on a half-hourly basis at each point of supply to each customer, and from that we can determine the net benefit over the year. So we have only modelled 1 year. It's important to keep in mind in terms of how indicative the charges are. So if a party has received a net benefit from an investment, I think as Alistair's mentioned earlier, their charges are based on their share of that, the share of benefit of that investment as a proportion of the total net benefit arising from that investment. For the smaller investments, we took a simpler approach, just to, it wasn't warranted to use the VSPUD method for those smaller investments. So we've used a regional approach and more of an engineering inspection approach to allocate the charges for those investments. And that's very similar to how the area of benefit charges were applied in the 2015 issues paper, more of a regional approach. So in terms of overall assumptions, the VSPUD method in particular is reliant on grid constraints. We're not experts in this area, so we've made some approximations on what those constraints would be. And these constraints can be quite important to the results that come out and the allocation of charges. Now, in practice, if Transpower were to use the VSPUD method or a similar SPD-based method, they would have the time and the expertise to get those constraints developed quite precisely. But again, we've made a simplification. But we have provided, as a bit of a guideline on sensitivity, there is one chart showing the sensitivity, I think, of the NIGU investment and how that the constraint level affects the allocation and the level of charges that apply. In terms of the charges being indicative, we need to remember that we haven't modelled the full set of contingencies that could arise from a transmission outage, so the full reliability benefits of the transmission investments aren't captured. It's more the capacity benefit and the losses benefit that we've modelled. The connection charges aren't used in the modelling, so we've only modelled the area of benefit charge and the residual charge. So comparing charges currently, say, to what they might be in the future, it's important to remove the connection charges, just so you've got a like-for-like comparison. And the data underpinning the model may not be representative for some customers in terms of load changes, generation changes, and particularly where there's embedded generation. So the modelling is more representative for typical larger customers. For very, very small customers, it's much harder to undertake the modelling. Particularly, we don't have embedded generation data. So we're trying to allocate charges using a gross measure of capacity. We've used gross AMD in the modelling to the extent we could, but there's a lot of embedded generation that falls below a level that we couldn't get the data for, so that isn't captured in the modelling. As I say, that affects mainly smaller customers. Are there any questions on that?
Thanks for the presentation, but just a quick question, the V-Spud method, is it an option just to apply that to everything and not having a residual charge then?
Alice can respond to that.
So, yes, so this is, you're probably not the first person that has asked that question. The reason we're proposing to just apply it to a limited number of investments initially is really just to make it a manageable task, applying the area of benefit charge. If we were applying it to all investments, we think that would be a much more substantial task. All historical investments going forward, we think there's a sort of a transition, give time for Transpower to build up the capability to apply the charge. Now, it need not be, as we pointed out, it need not be the V-Spud method. It could be another method.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying it's just like the enormity of the data involved in retrospectively doing V-Spud across everything. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so effectively, I don't think it's. Oh no, it's working now. I just have to hold it right. So for the V-Spud method, that requires basically a run with and without the investment. And we're thinking that, what we've done is modelling for a single year and using that as indicative of lifetime benefits. We'd envisage that it'd have to be a lot more runs that would be required. So we think probably it would be a particularly large task to do it for the grid as a whole. So, it's really just the practicality of doing that. We think that would be a particularly large task, but.
Is that working? So I guess what I'm trying to reconcile in my mind is the not insignificant impact of the residual charge against a whole bunch of work that someone has to do somewhere. That's what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Perhaps if I can. It's probably simplest. I'll just stand here and so we. It is. I guess what we're saying is it would be this. The residual charge certainly is quite simple to apply. We think it's quite simple to apply. The area of benefit charge is more complex. Of course, it is principally a one-off calculation. So we're really just trying to be practical in its coverage, in its initial coverage. That's really what our judgment is, and that's why we're sort of proposing it would be limited, applied to a limited set of investments. I guess partly that is when we did our 2012 proposal. We got feedback that proposing to apply it to a much broader range of investments, and we got a lot of feedback that was impractical. It was a different proposal, that one, so it was multiple calculations, and I guess we were sort of influenced by that. The feedback we got there to on that. I was just wondering, Christina, would we be able to open the back door, because I think it's getting quite warm in here. Yep. Okay, right. Were there any questions for Dave? Oh, yeah, sorry.
So My name's David Weaver. I've worked with David Rohan on the modelling. It's as much a question, but I think even if you take into account every investment, you still have quite a significant residual. If you take into account every investment that you can model, then you still end up with a significant residual. So it's not like it's a
sure.
It's not a panacea. You can't just model every investment and take out the residual. So although it certainly could be reduced, you're not going to end up with no residual.
Yeah. So I think that's because that operating cost, unallocated operating expenses and the overhead, $200 million a year. So you'd still at least have that. Yeah. Okay. Were there any further? Oh, Nick.
Hello.
Could you stand up, Nick?
Hi. Just Nick Wilson, Mighty Power. Just a quick question, because there was a lot of feedback from people, I think, through the process that a lot of people didn't like the SPD method being used. And I know in the 2015 proposal, I think the proposal for the area of benefit was quite different in that it was actually more linked to the grid investment test that Transpower has undertaken, which I personally support. I think that's a better way to do it. Obviously, BSPUD has some benefits in being able to identify beneficiaries, but I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that. It seems as though you've just used BSPUD as a way to sort of get some indicative charges out there to provide it, but you're not suggesting necessarily be the way that it would be calculated. That would still be up to Transpower.
Yeah, that would be for Transpower to propose. The method they would propose the method that they considered was best met the statutory objective. So that's sort of their guidance. So it could be the VSPD method, but it could be another method. And, we've identified some methods in the paper. I mean, we do think that, I guess the grid investment test is considering the overall benefits, the overall electricity market benefits, and what we're proposing is that the charges do relate to the overall benefits. Our grid investment test, or our GIT charge, or the area of benefit charge that we proposed in the options paper, did not consider necessarily all benefits. It would only consider, the main beneficiaries, whereas what we're proposing is all benefits. And, the assessment in the grid investment test is the electricity market benefit, so it is in effect all benefits.
So, I think we better move
okay,
on.
so I've got...
Move on to CBA, I think.
Okay, we'll go straight to the CBA. These, just to give you... these are impacts that I think are described in the paper, and so you can look at them at your leisure. And I'll hand it over to Ron.
Thanks, Alistair. My session, I'm going to talk about a bit of background to Oakley Greenwood, the basis for developing the CBA, so some of the key principles that we've adhered to in developing the CBA. Probably most importantly, from your perspective, the key benefits that we've modelled. And also, at the end, I'll just touch on some of the unquantified benefits. Obviously, it's a very complex task. Some of these benefits are fairly subjective in some cases, so there's some benefits that we haven't quantified but we've identified, so I'll just touch on them as well. Maybe because of time, Alistair, I might skip the one slide advert for Oakley Greenwood. Just to say, there is a mix of skills that we've brought to this particular task. I'm an economist by trade. We've had engineers working on it as well. So both of those skill sets are very important in doing a CBA like this. We've got some fairly detailed pricing experience in particular in Australia. So I designed the only critical peak demand charge that's being operated by a network business in the national electricity market. We do provide a lot of advice to network businesses in particular, distribution network businesses, around network pricing, so tariff strategy and the economic principles that underpin network prices. We've also undertaken a number of different cost-benefit analysis as well. The basis for developing the CBA. This is pretty simple, to be honest. It's really, we were to test whether the benefits of EA's proposal outweighed the costs. That's the fundamental premise behind it. And it's really in the context of both the current TPM as well as Transpower's 2015 review. So that represented our base case effectively. As I said, some of the benefits have been quantified, some haven't. I'll touch on those in the next slide. So we've quantified 4 specific benefits. The first is that future investment in services or equipment that may otherwise be substitutes for transmission services. Our assumption in suggesting that that is a benefit is that if you send a more cost-reflective transmission price signal, that can theoretically incentivise more efficient investments in alternatives to transmission in both the short term and the long term. So that's the first benefit that we've quantified in our CBA. The second is around the ability to co-optimise future investment in electricity generation and transmission services. So again, our assumption here is that both transmission pricing options that we model, so we model both the area of benefit charge and the deeper connection charge, that would allow a price signal for those deeper transmission connection assets to be signalled to generators, which would in effect allow them to co-optimise those transmission costs as well as their generation costs. The third one is around the pricing of historical investments in a network. This has been touched on a fair bit by Alistair with regards to the use of physical capacity and that residual charge. Here, basically, our assumption is that the way in which historical investments in a network are priced can affect economic efficiency if they distort future consumption or investment decisions, or if they lead customers to inefficiently retain a connection to or disconnect from the existing network. So that's particularly important. We're talking about a price signal that's recovering historical costs but causing changes and distorting future investment and consumption decisions. So that's been modelled as part of the CBA as well. And the last one was around more efficient quantity of transmission and generation services being demanded by the market. Again, our assumption here is that if you send a cost-reflective transmission price signal, that will flow through to end retail prices and cause a demand response, and that has ramifications for the cost of providing services. Any questions on the 4 benefits that we've modelled? Okay. We've got a summary of the results for the area of benefit charge compared to the base. I think just to point out a couple of the key ones, this $92 million one, that's the largest one. That's around the more efficient co-investment in generation and transmission services. And the other significant benefit comes around the pricing of historical investments. So that's the replacement of the regional coincident peak demand charge with a charge that's based on physical capacity. So again, this is getting to that residual charge and how that's structured and the price signal that that's sending to the market and what that does in terms of future consumption and investment decisions that are made in response to that price signal. Just for people's benefit as well, we did also quantify the impact of the introduction of a more prudent, more comprehensive prudent discount policy. I mean, this is a fundamental aspect of the proposal, and it's one that we've had regard to in terms of doing the quantification, and there are net benefits in our modelling coming through from that change. And as Alistair suggested as well, it's actually good for all consumers, all businesses, if you get that PDP policy right. We've also obviously, that's talking to the benefits side of the CBA. We've also looked at the cost side of the CBA. Obviously, the cost side is somewhat difficult to derive. We've sort of done a bottom-up build based on the resources required to do certain tasks for certain businesses, or at least our estimate, and as well as a salary rate associated with that. So just needless to say, we have had regard for the costs associated with the implementation of the proposed area of benefit charge. As I've said, there are a couple of unquantified benefits, which I think Roger will talk about after me. But the first one, and I think the most important one from the authority's point of view, is around additional scrutiny. So the proposal is that by sending this price signal to customers, it'll give them greater incentive to reveal their willingness to pay for transmission services. So out of that, particularly through the regulatory process, the view is that should incentivise more efficient investment in transmission services. And that's one that we haven't quantified. So in those figures I showed you before, that's not in there, but we acknowledge that it is a potential benefit, and so it should be had regard for in the decision-making process. There are a couple of other aspects of the area of benefit charge relative to the deeper connection charge that we just wanted to draw your attention to as well. And it's one that Alistair has touched on before, and that's the structure of the area of benefit charge, this sort of fixed variable structure. What that does, as I said before, is that it sends a cost-reflective marginal price signal through the broader area of benefit charge, which in theory should encourage efficient investments in alternative to the transmission product that's being costed there. So that's an important differentiation, and one that's definitely in favour of the area of benefit charge relative to the deeper connection charge. The deeper connection charge is also based on a 5-year rolling average of flows. So what this does is basically creates a new effective per megawatt charge to recover what are sunk costs. So this gets back to how you price historical investments and whether you have a price signal that can potentially distort future consumption or investment behaviour. In theory, under the deeper connection charge, because you've got this 5-year rolling average and that gets converted into a per megawatt charge, it actually can distort future consumption and investment decisions. Obviously that's mitigated quite significantly because of the length of the period. If it was a 1 year, obviously there'd be a much greater incentive to change your consumption to try and avoid that charge, despite the fact that that charge is designed to recover sunk investments, so your response can't change those costs. And the other thing to note is that the deeper connection charge may, in theory, create a locational distortion as well, depending on the HHI index. And that's my very brief summary of the CBA in 5 slides.
Hi, Ron. Just a very quick question on your last slide.
Yes.
It was a part of your paper I didn't really understand. You described the area of benefit charge as a 2-part fixed variable tariff.
Yes.
Can you just explain that? Because it isn't.
So this goes to Alistair, one of Alistair's slides earlier, where he said, well, I've got this transformer. And it's
you talking about the marginal price signal?
Yes, yeah. So
it's a very specific circumstance. It's not the general at all. It's just one number. The area of benefit charge is just one number, as I understand it. There's the potential for Are you saying that... No. Are you saying the variable tariff... Yeah, maybe I should shut up and let you talk.
No, I understand where you're coming from. Sorry, your name? Hayden. Sorry, Hayden. I understand where you're coming from. The key thing with the area of benefit charge is you can look to the beneficiaries and go, I've got this $20 million of costs for a transformer that I'm going to recover from the beneficiaries. And you could, if there were 5 beneficiaries of equal weighting, it'd be $4 million each, say. However, that doesn't send a marginal price signal to those consumers about the actions they should be taking and the benefits that Transpower will get from them taking those actions. So the distributed generation one that I spoke to earlier was a prime example, where if you didn't have that marginal price signal, it'd drop from 40% down to 20%, and it'd go from $4 million to $2 million, but actually the benefit in terms of the reduction in the cost of the transformer was only $1 million, not the 2.
Okay, okay. Well, it's just... Yeah, I sort of looked at that in your paper and it sounded like you were suggesting that it was some sort of 2-part tariff.
It effectively operates like that. I mean, Alistair, do you want to jump in here, or Roger?
No, that's all right. I understand what... Yeah, I understand that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marianne from Pioneer Energy. I'd like to compliment you on the amount of detail that's been put on the website in terms of Excel spreadsheets on the CBA, but I'm just wondering, a lot of the cells are values as opposed to equations, so it's a bit hard to see how the numbers are derived. That's just a comment. But in terms of the co-optimisation of generation and transmission and the value in the CBA of about 90 million, I just wondered if you were able to rerun that CBA, or if it was relevant to rerun it with excluding generation projects that have been abandoned, like the HMR project, and I think Rodney's unlikely to go ahead as well.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that, but we could, yeah.
Okay. And the other question I had was also wondering why you've assumed that all the new distributed generation that's built is assumed to be fuelled by diesel.
Yeah, that was an assumption that we made. We've assumed that the current RCPD charge, which incentivises effectively through the ACOP payments investments in DG, has exhausted all of the cheap generation, distributed generation, and our modelling showed that the RCPD charge, as it currently stands, or will stand when the new changes come in, will incentivise. It's large enough to incentivise investments in diesel reciprocating engines. So that's why that charge is incentivising investment in those types of distributed generators. But the costs associated with those distributed generators are actually higher than our calculated marginal cost for a transmission service. So that's why you get the quite high benefits from actually removing the RCPD charge, because you're not sending that price signal anymore.
Okay, because that was the next question. Was it's clear in your paper that you think that peak demand volumes drive the need for new transmission capacity, but then you've got a major benefit from removing the RCPD charge and relying on peak capacity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So one is about the changing how we're pricing. Transpower prices historical investments effectively. So that's the RCPD charge. So we're suggesting what we're modelling is the removal of that effectively and reliance on a measure of physical capacity, which won't incentivise investments in distributed generation at all or demand response. However, as another line item, if we go back, we've got the future investment in services or equipment. So this top one is about with the area of benefit charge. If you send that price signal to the market, what does that incentivise as an alternative to a transmission investment? So here we've modelled demand response. Here we've modelled DG. So deferral benefits for 1 year using DG. So they're the two key benefits that come about from sending that area of benefit charge.
So just to add one more point, we were planning to do a rerun of the CBA in this consultation process. Obviously, we have to keep an open mind, and it may be that following consultation, points such as you raised, Marianne, we may have to go and rework the CBA, but it wasn't our intention, and we don't plan to do a rerun of the CBA. And you may be better appointed to answer this question, Alistair, but in terms of that plant that you indicated wasn't in the, since subsequently a decision had been made to retire that plant. I understand you used the MB modelling, didn't you?
Yes.
The MB data,
yep.
Which has been developed after some comprehensive process. But I understand that may not make much of a difference in terms of the overall CBA results anyway?
Well, no.
Sorry, maybe.
So my point was really so the CBA was done using using information from a public source. So I mean, to that extent, it is an appropriate source of information. And so if it does result in generators that may or may now not going to be proceed, it's really just a case of whether that source is up to date as it could be. But what we're trying to do is do a CBA using publicly available data so that people can scrutinise it. But I think the point is that it's still those costs. It still is going to give an indication of the likely costs and benefits. It could be another generator that would come forward.
Exactly right.
Nick Wilson, Mighty River. Just a quick question. I just wondered if you might be able to comment on, if at all, or where reliability benefits to consumers might be included in the CBA. We had a big outage here not so long ago, which the authority in Penrose, which the authority made an economic assessment of some number of millions of dollars negative to the economy from outages, of course, and reliability. Reliability very important.
Yes.
My question being that we seem to be claiming a lot of benefits from an improved TPM from increased scrutiny and deferral of transmission investments. So of course, if we defer things and our price signals aren't as finely tuned as we think we are, and we create incentives for people to defer longer than they're necessary, it can be an impact to consumers. And I just don't seem to see that anywhere in any CBAs. And I just wonder whether you want to comment on that as to why that is and whether it should be included.
I'd probably let Roger talk to the scrutiny issue, because I think you're going to talk about that next, aren't you, Roger? Yeah. And that, I think, goes to a lot of those projects that are fundamentally driven by reliability as opposed to increasing demand, which has been our primary focus when we've done our modelling, is that effectively those projects, the amount of CapEx that's going to be spent by Transpower in augmenting the transmission network to cater for increases in future demand. And then we've looked at the alternatives to a transmission investment, so demand response and embedded generation.
I just had a question of the extent to which you have really modelled an area of benefit charge, or indeed a deeper connection charge, in relation to your $92 million estimate for...
Sorry, what was that last bit?
The $92 million that you have for better trade-offs between transmission and generation decisions.
Yes.
I've looked at your model, and it seems as though what you're actually modelling is the benefits of if anything, a regional LRMC charge, because you're actually adding a regional LRMC estimate on top of hypothetical build schedule, but that's not an area of benefit charge, and it's not a deeper connection charge. So I'm sort of a bit puzzled as to whether this is actually modelling anything but an LRMC charge. So I guess that was my first question.
You're exactly right. Sorry, just to answer that one. You are right in that we've used that as effectively the analogue for an area of benefit charge, because we don't know...
And a deeper connection charge as well, because you get the same number.
Exactly
so
right.
It's not really $92 million of benefits from an area of benefit charge at all, is it? It's a long-run marginal cost charge on a regional basis. Is that correct?
Well, the area of benefit charge is designed to signal the cost of future investment, isn't it? Analogous to an LRMC charge. So that's why I've had to do that. And
I suppose that's true to an extent, but then why the option of Transpower having an LRMC charge on top of that? It sort of doesn't really...
You have to talk to the authority about that. This is our modelling approach, mainly because we can't identify exactly which investments will be made where in our modelling. We couldn't do that. So we had to sort of...
But you're assuming implicitly that the people who are making these generation decisions can do that and assigning a $92 million benefit to it.
That's the point of the area of benefit charge.
Can I just answer perhaps to your question, Hayden? Because, as I said before, we're proposing the area of benefit charge on the basis that parties will respond to the prospect of an area of benefit charge, knowing that if they don't respond, they would face that charge. But
assuming everybody else behaves the same way. So
sure.
That's the difference to an ex-ante charge where you get an immediate benefit. If I'm going to incur short-term costs, which depend on what many other people in the market might do, I might not actually respond that way. So that's the difference between an ex-ante cost allocation, which is what the area of benefit charge actually is, and a genuine ex-ante price signal. I think you're conflating the two throughout the whole paper.
So what we're saying is that if there is an adequate price signal through the area of benefit charge, that should be sufficient by itself. But if Transpower assesses that isn't adequate, then they would be able to also propose the LRMC charge. So you would be getting that ex-ante price signal, because there may be a situation where one customer responds to the prospect of the area of benefit charge and another customer doesn't, in which case an LRMC charge might be appropriate. So we're not saying that there wouldn't be necessarily an LRMC charge. We're saying it does depend on Transpower's assessment of how its customers would respond.
We might, because we do have the room booked for longer, but I recognise that many of you probably want to leave shortly. So we'll just jump out of the going to talk about some of the unqualified benefits, the authority's views on some of the unqualified benefits that were referred to by...
Right, I shall be super quick because I know we're out of time. Suffice it... How do I do this?
Push that right-hand button.
Right-hand button. Yep. That was Ryan's. That's Ryan's. And you're right, absolutely right about the way that is modelled. And our thinking is that if customers foresee that they are going to be facing an AOB charge if an investment takes place, they will take that into account in their calculus. If they're the only customer that's going to benefit from the investment, or if costly suffer from the investment, they will rationally self-ration, and that's what we see in connection charges. They don't have to with the interconnected grid because the nodal price does the rationing for us, and if it doesn't, then we've got the LRMC charge as a potential backup. So people won't use the grid more than to its capacity, as signalled by the nodal price, and the Transpower shouldn't be investing until the benefit in terms of savings, that is a reduction in nodal prices, among other things, exceeds the costs. So we think it's quite a reasonable modelling technique. Naturally, different professional will come up with a somewhat different cost-benefit analysis and a somewhat different assessment of benefits. That's the nature of these things. As you said, there's lots of numbers there that look like made up, but you have to exercise a lot of professional judgment when you're undertaking a CBA, and we think that the judgments that have been made are reasonable ones. Importantly, the Oakley Greenwood also did quite a lot of sensitivity analysis, and it's just miles away from being anywhere near negative net benefits under any of the sensitivity analysis. So we take that as quite a positive sign that it's robust to variations in assumptions and always likely to be net positive. We also think that the unquantified benefits are large, and we think they're larger than is likely to be the case as signalled by the Oakley Greenwood sensitivity analysis. In particular, we think the improved scrutiny that will come from some customers bearing most of the costs it is likely to be quite substantial compared to what it is now, that they've got skin in the game, and they will have information which will better inform the decisions, and so you're likely to get better specification and timing of investments. They have the incentive to support efficient investments and oppose inefficient investments, and almost as importantly, people who are not benefiting from the investment don't have any incentive to oppose it as they currently do. So from that we see reduced costs of unproductive disputes, both for that reason and because when prices are service-based and cost-reflective, customers normally just regard that as reasonable. They regard it as reasonable that they're going to pay for something that they benefit from, and not reasonable to pay for something that they're not going to benefit from. So we think that will reduce the cost of unproductive disputes. There may still be disputes, but there'll be more about whether these investments are good investments, and that's a good debate to have. And as a consequence of that reduced cost of unproductive disputes, we think it's going to be more durable. The TPM is likely to be more durable, and that in turn will reduce uncertainty. The couple of other benefits, I'll just mention them briefly. We think it's likely that customers will not be inefficiently encouraged or discouraged from entering the market as they are now. For example, if a customer is not paying anything towards for transmission services, as some customers don't. And secondly, the benefits are modelled for 20 years, but as we know, transmission investments last a lot longer than that. All in all, we think these benefits are likely to be large, and if you're interested in more reasons as to why, either I can answer questions now, or Chapter 8 has got that in a lot more detail.
Well, I think given the time, I can see people leaving. We might just finish it off now. So I just wanted to put up this final slide. Just shows you the next steps for the TPM review. The key next step really is submission date closure. It's 26th of July. of 2016, so 26th of next month. That also coincides with the closure date for submissions on the related distribution generation price of principles paper as well. So both those submissions on both those papers close on the 26th of July. So I won't dwell on this any further. Look, I just wanted to thank you for attending today. You really took up the challenge to have a discussive, engaging session, so I thank you for that. If you're interested in attending some further workshops, we've got 3 over the next 3 days, tomorrow in Wellington, and as I said, Thursday in Invercargill and Friday in Christchurch. Also, if I know we've run out a bit of time today, we had to rush it a bit, so there is the potential, obviously, still remaining, and there will be right through the consultation period, to request a meeting with us. We're very happy to meet with you on a one-to-one basis, and we have been meeting with many parties on the TPM or indeed on the DGPP. So look, thank you very much. We're around for a bit longer if you want to have some further discussions with us after this. Thank you.